Okay, my name is Richard Field. Nickname is Dick. Always been known as Dick. My mother used to call me Dickie. I was born and raised in upstate New York, about 110 miles northwest of New York City, a little town of Liberty, New York. At that time, the population was probably about 5,000 people. We lived on the outskirts of town. Always ran around in the woods, hunted and fished and so forth. And that stood me well when I went into the service because I was in pretty good shape physically. When I was fairly young, my mother and father split, and I had to spend time. I went to school when I was about 12 or 13 years old. Went down to New York City, went to school there, and spent my summers in my hometown up in Liberty. Again, in the summer, did a lot of fishing, and then winter hunting and so forth. Prior to going into the service, I worked in a few construction jobs with a very, very dear friend of mine. I worked on an Alcoa aluminum plant up on the St. Lawrence River in almost across the border from Canada, actually, Messina, New York. And when the winters hit up there, it got very, very cold. We got out of there and went down to Chesapeake Bay and they were at the time building Patuxent Naval Base. We worked on that, and then in May of 1943, I was inducted into the service. Went into the Army and went to, my basic training was in Camp Wheeler, Georgia, which is just outside of Macon. And I forget how many weeks of basic training we had, but again, because of my upbringing as a young man, I was able to handle it very, very well. I had no problem at all. And about 2 weeks or so before our basic training was over, an airborne officer came to the camp and trying to recruit people, volunteers for the airborne. And he painted a rosy picture, you float down, you jump out and float down and all this. And the thing that really got me, I was young and macho and all that kind of crap, but when he said that they paid you $50 more to jump out of airplanes, at the time I think my base salary was $26 a month, so that $50 sounded awfully good to me. So I volunteered for the airborne. At the conclusion of my basic training, I was shipped to Fort Benning, Georgia, which is where the Airborne Training School is. It's still there today. This is 1943, and many of the facilities that we used at that time are still being used today. The 250-foot towers, the mock-up towers, 35-foot mock-up towers, to learn how to exit a door and so forth are still being used today. And much of the training that they're doing today was very, very much the same as what we did when I went through there.
Dick, did you live during the Depression time?
Yeah, I was born. I was born in 1924. So, as a young kid, that was a Depression era. So we were dirt poor. It was tough. One thing that living in the country that we were able to do, we were able to have a small, they used to call them table gardens, where you grew some vegetables and stuff. My mother did a lot of canning, and we had chickens. So we had eggs, and we needed to eat a chicken. We'd kill a chicken and eat it. So we were, in that way, a little more fortunate than the people living in cities where they didn't have gardens, and that's where the real guys selling apples on the corner and pencils and stuff like that. We didn't have any of that, but we were dirt poor. I mean, 25 cents was a lot of money. My first job, can't remember how old I was caddying there was a resort area, and there was a big resort hotel up there called Grossinger's, and my first job was caddying on their golf course. And as I remember, I think we used to get 75 cents or so for caddying for 18 holes, and then they'd wind up generally giving you a 25-cent tip or so for it. You got $1 to carry a bag for 18 holes, which was generally about 3.5, 4 hours. And most of that money I gave to my mother because, the parents, because we were, as I say, dirt poor. We needed it to exist, really. It was a tough time.
How big was your family?
I had a sister that died in infancy, and I have two brothers and a sister. And one brother is still living. My sister still lives, and one brother passed away a number of years ago. And my older brother lives in Sun City, Arizona. My sister just moved from Huntington, New York, down to the Philadelphia area. And we stay in touch by phone all the time. We're a fairly close family.
And what made you join the Army?
Well, I was going to be drafted, and I actually tried to get into the Navy. And young, kids at that time, we were partying all the time and so forth. And the day I had to go to Binghamton, New York for my physical, and I partied pretty heavily the night before. So when they took a kind of a rudimentary physical for the Navy, I was not in good shape because of what I'd been doing the night before. So they shot me down. So I said, "Oh, hell with it! I'll go in the Army." And that's the way that came about. I was 18 years old. And
okay, so you're in basic training. You said you found basic training pretty easy, yeah?
Well, it was rigorous. I mean, it was infantry basic. There's all kinds of different basic trainings, armor, artillery, and so forth. And infantry basic training was quite severe. With a lot of marching and carrying, packs and learning how to shoot rifles, different pistols and things like that. And the fact that I'd grown up in the country helped me a great deal there, plus the fact that I had hunted and fished and spent a lot of time outdoors, so I was able to handle it quite well. The guys that had a tough time with that were people that they were born and raised in some city, and you take somebody like that and put a pack on their back and make them march 20 miles. Some of those guys had a pretty tough time with that, And of course, when I went into airborne, that was even more rigorous than the regular infantry basic training was. Where we marched a lot, and infantry basic, very often we were running. Airborne, you did tremendous amount of running, and much more difficult training.
So tell me about the airborne. So you got into the airborne training because you entered the airborne mainly motivated by the money.
Well, yeah, that's true. And this guy looked real sharp, this officer. I think he was the first lieutenant that came. He had his boots, all spit polished, and he looked really sharp, And that appealed to me also. When we got shipped to Fort Benning, they had classes running from certain times. So when we got there, you had to wait for a class to open up. For a new class to start. So we were billeted in an area right adjacent to the airport called the Frying Pan. Now this is August in Georgia. So the Frying Pan was a very apropos name. They were squad tents, and at that point, as soon as you hit there, you were committed, and one of the objectives that they had were to try to get you to quit. It did stuff, for minor infractions, get down and give me 20. They're talking about push-ups now. A little more major infraction, they'd make you dig a 6x6. That's a hole 6 feet square and 6 feet deep. And this is in Georgia clay. And when you got it all finished, they'd make you fill it back up again. Just stuff like that, just to keep you occupied until an actual airborne class opened up. I think I was in the Frying Pan about 2 weeks, probably, as I recall. And then when the class opened up, then we went into barracks at Fort Benning and started our training, which that time it was 4 weeks. I think it's 3 weeks now, and I'm not too sure about that. But at that time it was 4 weeks. First week was mainly calisthenics, a lot of to build you up physically, running in place and even running all over the place. You ran to mess, you ran to your barrack, you did not walk. And a lot of push-ups, chin-ups, and so forth. Second week was even more of that, along with get into rope climbing, and that's when we got into jumping out of 35-foot mock-up towers. You jumped out and you had a cable, your harness hooked to this cable, and you jumped out and slid down this cable. Now they go into a bank, but at that time you would get down toward the end of this thing, it would cut you loose, and you would have like a simulated landing, and you'd learn how to tumble. That was another thing they taught you, how to tumble, the right way to fall. You did not try to stand up. Nowadays, when you see these skydivers, they're parabolic parachutes. They're like a wing. They can land those things on a card table and land very softly. We did not. If you tried to stand up, you're in danger of breaking a leg or something. And all of that was taught to us. Then the third week were the 250-foot towers, where they have the parachute open on a ring, and they'd haul you up 250 feet, and it's pretty hairy. You're looking down between your legs, and there's nothing. You're hanging around the window, swaying around up there. And then they have a megaphone. They'd shout out your number one arm. There was 4 arms in this tower. And you'd say ready, and that thing would slam up and release, and you would fall, and the parachute would open up. And you learn, by doing this, you learn how to control the parachute to a certain degree, and also how to when you landed, how to tumble and so forth. Another thing they had, if it was at all breezy, when you landed, the parachute would not deflate, and it would drag you. And they had motors with big fans on them, and they'd lay you flat on the ground and flip a parachute open, and this fan would blow the parachute and start to drag you across the ground. And you had to learn how to collapse the parachute by pulling on the shroud lines, or a number of different ways of doing it. That was all the stuff that went on. And then the fourth week, toward the end of the third week, we went into the packing sheds and learned how to pack a parachute. And then the fourth week, we packed a parachute in the morning, or you packed a parachute one evening and jumped that parachute the next day. And when you landed, when you came back, you packed a parachute and jumped it the following day. But the rest of the day was compared to what we had been doing, it was very, very simple, because about all we had to do was pack that parachute, and then we were free for the rest of the day until the next morning we had to jump again, you know. The fifth jump was a night jump. Which, you know, at the conclusion of that, at night jump the next day, you fell out and you got your wings and so forth. And very shortly, I think within a day or two after that, I was assigned to the 551st Parachute Infantry Battalion. They were stationed at Camp McCall, North Carolina. And I went by train up to Camp McCall, North Carolina, and that was, as near as I can remember, probably early to mid-September of 1943. They had just gotten back from Panama. They were in Camp McCall probably a week or two when I joined them.
Right. Okay. Let's go back to airborne school now. Tell me about your first jump. Were you scared?
Well, you know, that's a question that often gets asked. The first jump, you're more curious. Then the second jump, you knew what it was all about, and if there was any fright involved, it would probably be more in the second and third jump than the first jump. You're a little curious, you know, and but after 2 or 3 jumps, you don't. It was just. It's an unnatural thing to do, to jump out of an airplane at 1,000 or 1,200 feet or whatever, you know. But you, again, with training, intensive training, you just kind of accept it and didn't really think too much about it, you know. as I say, we were well trained. We were ready for what was going to happen. They clued you in, you know. You're supposed to count 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, you know. And I think I did that the first jump. But after, you know when that thing is supposed to open. And immediately upon opening, they always want you to cock your head back and check your canopy out and make sure that you don't have any blown panels and that the parachute is properly deployed and so forth, in case you had to pull your reserve chute. But you didn't bother counting after the first time. At least I didn't. You know darn well when that thing is supposed to be open. And the time element, when you're jumping from low altitude that way, this is, excuse me, this is another thing that when you see skydivers, they're jumping from 6, 7, 8, even 10,000 feet, and they're floating around up there having a grand old time. Airborne, the idea was to get you on the ground as quickly as possible. They didn't want you floating around up there. So we jumped generally from about 1,000 feet. When you go out of the airplane with a static line, you'll fall about 250 to 300 feet before your parachute opens. Now you're down to 700 feet. If anything is wrong, you've got to pull a reserve chute and you fall another couple hundred feet before that opens. So you can see that the latitude you have there is very, very slight. I mean, you don't have, they told us that if you went out at 1,000 feet and without your parachute didn't open, you hit the ground in 9 seconds. So you don't have a whole lot of time to, there are many times, especially during jump training, where guys would not panic necessarily, but think there's something wrong, pull a reserve chute, and they come down with 2 parachutes, you know, and get severely reprimanded for that, of course. But all during jump training, again, they tried to do everything that they could to get you to quit. I guess their feeling was if you couldn't handle what they were dishing out, you didn't deserve to be a paratrooper. And the end result of that is that we were a brotherhood. I mean, when Airborne was a very, very special group of people at that time. We were the forerunners of the Rangers and the Green Berets and all that. It all started with the Airborne paratroopers. And I'm proud of the fact, you know.
So you feel there's an elite status there?
Very much so. Yeah. Very much so. And I think that's probably true today. At that time, we were the only ones who wore boots. The rest of the service people all wore cuffs down over the shoes, and the Airborne wore jump boots. They were made by Cochrane. That company's still in existence today. You can buy the same jump boots that we used back then, and we were a proud bunch of guys. We looked sharp with our wings on and those jump boots. You know, we thought we could lick the world. But whether or not was good, and a bunch of young kids. You know, that's the thing that I try in any talking to young people, if they start asking, is to stress to them we were kids. I mean, I was 18 years old. When I parachuted into France, I was 19 years old. These guys were flying P-51s and P-38s and B-17 bombers. They were 22, 23, 24-year-old kids, you know. And that's hard. In today's society, that's a difficult thing for people to accept when they look at a brother who's 24, 25 years old, and they kind of think, God, I can't imagine him doing something like that, you know. So.
Tell me about the washout rate or the people that didn't cut it in Airborne school. At one time I did know the percentage. I would say, looking back, and this is just from memory, I would say out of 50 people, there would probably be 20 to 25, almost 50% washout that couldn't handle it, you know. A lot of guys that go through the thing, when it came to jumping, they refused to jump. They call it freezing in the door. They put their hands on the door and they refuse to, and they always have a jump master during school. They have a jump master there, and they jerk the guy out of the way. And then
he was gone. You never saw him again. When they landed, he was out, and it was tough training, but it was good. They fed us well, and I was probably in the best physical shape I've ever been in my life when I got done with that. And even when we went into a unit like the 551st, that training continued. And we made practice jumps. The only thing we did not have to do when you joined the unit, we didn't have to pack our own parachutes anymore. They have a rigging section that took care of mending any harness and things like that. And when we had to jump, all we had to do is pick our parachute, and they had a big canvas bag you stuffed it in. The rigging section, they sent trucks out and picked these, and they took them back and packed the parachutes, so we didn't have to pack our own parachutes anymore. But the thing continued as far as exercising, calisthenics, running, rifle range, depending on whether you're a machine gunner or mortars and so forth, you're training almost constantly. It was a great time of life, looking back on it, really. I made friendships developed. The unit that I was assigned was a very small. It was a battalion, which was about a little over 800 people, and as opposed to a division, which is the divisions usually consist of 4 or 5 regiments and thousands and thousands of men. So it was almost like a little family, and we have. I made friendships that have lasted to this day. I'm in touch with people that I serve with,
Okay, so take me a little bit through Camp McCall now. So when you join with the 551st, and so you join the outfit, and then some of the training that occurred there, but then as well you did the glider jumping.
That was again, I joined them in late August or early September of 1943, and they at that time, the CG-4 Waco gliders were used primarily to. They towed 2 of those things behind the C-47. They could the nose of the thing opened up, and they could back a Jeep in there, or a 75 millimeter pack howitzer, a small cannon type thing, or you could have 12 infantrymen. And they were experimenting the C-47 and towing 2 gliders and having paratroopers jump out of these things. They thought they could get more men into a battle zone quicker by doing this, and it was an experimental thing. And they came to the different companies in the battalion and asked for volunteers to make jumps out of these gliders, and I did volunteer for that. And they had there are a lot of men from the different companies, from A Company, C Company, Headquarters Company, and so forth, that did this, and it never really panned out because they were very not maneuverable at all, and when the C-47 was towing 2 things, the airspeed was way down, and they were setting ducks. And gliders, those guys that went in those gliders deserve a lot of credit, man. They were death traps, those things. The first time I jumped, I was never so glad to get out of anything in my life of that thing, because they had just a door on each side, a very small door, and the whole thing is open to the back, so the wind is whistling in, and the cables are vibrating. And when they said, "Let's go," I went out of there. And right now, I made at least 2, I think maybe 3 jumps out of those gliders. One of them was a mass jump for Secretary of War Stimson at that time came down, and what they did. They waited till all the airplanes and all the gliders were over the airport, and everybody jumped at once. And that's not the way it's done in combat, actually. It looked really impressive, and but that kind of fell by the wayside. They never continued doing that. Another tragic jump that we had. They trucked us from Camp McCall over to Fort Bragg, and this was a night jump. And the theory was they were going to load us on planes at Fort Bragg and then fly around for like an hour or whatever to simulate flying to a drop zone in enemy territory. And they flew back, and the drop zone was back at Camp McCall, and the jump should have been aborted. It was almost raining. It was very misty, overcast, no visibility at all, and Air Force screwed up royally. Made a wrong pass, came, and they dropped 40 men. They dropped us right over a lake, Lake Kinney Cameron, and 40 men landed in the lake, and we lost 8 of them drowned. When I went out, I remember looking down, and I could see like just a little different hue, color. You know, it looked a little darker or a little lighter, I guess. And I figured that was the drop zone. But then when the planes went on away and the noise of the engine died, I could hear splashing and guys screaming and yelling, and I realized there was water. And I was able to. I slipped my parachute as much as I could. I lit about 10 feet from the lake, and it was chaotic. Got my harness off and started trying to help guys out of the water and so forth. And they say we lost 8 guys drowned. They have a memorial there that commemorating those 8 people, and it's out in the middle of nowhere. It's a pristine, beautiful lake. They do a lot of fishing and stuff in there, back in the pines. And if you look at it today, it'd be hard to imagine what a terrible night that was that evening. It was an artificial lake, and they got all the men out except one, and they had to blow the dam and drain the lake. His parachute and stuff had got tangled in a stump, and they had to drain the lake to finally get him out, and then they redammed it, and the lake is back to where it was then, you know. One of the guys in B Company, Benny Preziotti, drowned that night, and his nephew, Richard, has been to a number of our reunions, and I stay in touch with him quite a bit. He and his wife. He's become almost a part of the thing. He's attended a number of reunions.
Tell me, so you're with the 551st now. You're paratroopers. You got your wings. How about whilst you're at Camp McCall? What do you guys do when you get an opportunity to have a night off or something like that? And
well, these had you enlisted bands clubs, and they had PXs, and you could go and drink 3-2 beer. Occasionally, you'd get a 2 or 3 day pass, and the closest town of any side, there was a little town of Hoffman, which was just a wide spot in the road, and then the closest town was Hamlet, North Carolina, and that wasn't much bigger. But Charlotte, North Carolina was kind of a liberty town. They had buses that ran there all the time. If we got a weekend pass or something, we'd generally go into Charlotte and just party, go to movies, and they had movies on base too, you know. But most of the time, we were pretty tired. A lot of gambling, crap games, card games, and stuff like that in the barracks, you know.
Now, were you the only airborne unit in the area?
No, there were Camp McCall was all airborne, the whole camp, and there were I think the 517 to 509. I think at one time there was a regiment or so of the 101st in there too. I don't know what but every unit there was airborne.
Okay, so everyone walking around town were paratroopers.
Right.
So
right.
Yeah. Okay.
Not necessarily in Charlotte.
Yeah.
When we went to Charlotte, we stood out pretty much, again, with the boots and everything. But if you went into Hoffman or Hamlet, nearly everybody there was airborne.
Well, tell me about that. Tell me about going into a town that you're mixing with other infantrymen, and you know how you felt in the paratroopers uniform.
They left us alone pretty much. They knew. Again, it was kind of a brotherhood type thing, and they left us alone. If we went, as I say, Hamlet, was nearly all airborne anyway. When we went to Charlotte, there were other troops there, you know, and they steered pretty clear of us. There were fights and stuff, but they knew better than to tangle with us most of the time. Battle cry, you know, some of them got in trouble. You yelled Geronimo, and they'd have airborne guys there, you know, helping them out.
Yeah, and so there was certainly an elite feeling.
Very much so. Probably more so than even today, because we were very unique. You know, again with our uniforms and so forth. All the soldiers today wear boots, so there's nothing unusual there. They all wear berets, so there's nothing unusual there. Our overseas cap, we had a patch on it with a parachute and a glider and so forth, and so we kind of stood out no matter where we went, you know.
That's good. Okay, I guess really then from there, you took a Liberty ship overseas? Is that?
Yeah, I went from there in April of 1944. We went to Newport News, Virginia, and embarked on Liberty ships. We had a big convoy. I forget how long it took us to go overseas, and the convoy, we did a lot of zigzagging because of the U-boats and so forth, and a convoy can only go as fast as the slowest ship, obviously.
So I wanted to start that point.
So, and this was in the spring, it was April, so the weather was going over, the trip we had over was rather calm. We played a lot of cards and stuff. We had... left in April of 1944. We left Camp McCall and took trains to Newport News, Virginia, where we got on a Liberty ship and joined a convoy to Europe. And the weather was, as I say, was April, so the weather was quite nice. Played a lot of cards. That's where I learned how to play cribbage. And one thing that we did do, our first sergeant, Sergeant Tom Thornton, was a fisherman out of Florida, and he taught us how to make mesh nets to put over our helmets so that we could stick twigs and branches and stuff in for camouflage. And he'd have classes on that thing, you know. But when you're on board ship, there's not a heck of a lot. They did some calisthenics just to keep your muscle tone, and then we sailed. Kind of an unusual thing. We sailed through the Strait of Gibraltar in broad daylight. At that time, it was very dangerous, very narrow neck of water, and the U-boats used to lay in there and wait, you know. And we got through. They did. There was one ship attack that some of the 551st guys were on. It wasn't anything major. They were able to get into port. We landed at Oran, Africa. We weren't there very long. Again, we were at the tent city outside of Oran, and again kept calisthenics to keep you. And one thing I remember about Oran, Africa, while we were there, they had a locust plague. These grasshoppers, what they were, and they came through in the grape vineyards. You could see these Arabs out there with brooms trying to beat these things, and it was they just stripped the vineyards, you know, the leaves, they ate everything. You walked around, it was squishy, it was slippery, there were thousands and millions of them, you know. And I just remember that incident. From Oran, we got on a British troop carrier to go to Naples, Italy. And the thing I remember about that British troop carrier is when we walked on board, all you could smell was mutton. They eat a lot of mutton and this horrible stuff. And they didn't have any bunks on this thing. You had hammocks, and you slung hammocks from pipes and stuff. Fortunately, I wasn't very long. I think it took us a couple of days or so to get to to Naples. Debarked in Naples and got on trains and went down to Sicily. They call them 40 and 8s, and that's a throwback to World War One. On the side of the boxcars, they used to have 40 ohm 8 chevaux with French, which 40 men or 8 horses is what they could put in these boxcars. And the train, it was terrible. I mean, you'd ride along and all of a sudden it would stop and they'd put you over on the siding. Well, there's another train coming through the other way, and I forget how long it took us to get down to Sicily. And when we got down there, we figured out we're going to get a break, we're going to get off this thing and get on a boat to go over to Sicily. Not the case. They had ferries that docked, and the railroad tracks were right on the ferry, and they just rolled the boxcars. We were in the same boxcar. They just rolled it right onto the ferry and sailed across the Strait of Messina and landed in Sicily and hooked another engine up to it. And away we went. Same boxcar. We were near Trapani, Sicily. A lot of hard training, night marches, night exercises, a lot of stuff on the rifle range, weapons training, and so forth. And again, I don't remember how long we were there, but from there we got back on these boxcars and did the same thing the other way and went back up to Rome. And in Rome, we were stationed in a maritime, billeted in a maritime college just outside of there's a place called Lido di Roma. And it was, as I say, a maritime college that we were billeted in. And some more training there, but that was kind of nice because you could get passes and go into the city. And even as a young kid, 18 years old at the time, 18, I guess I was 19 then. Yeah, I was 19 then. And I had enough sense to realize that I was seeing some pretty special stuff in Rome, the Forum and the Colosseum and stuff like that. So did a lot of sightseeing there and partied, of course, too, but that was a pretty nice area to be stationed at the time. And then on August 15th, we on trucks, and they took us to an airport just north of Rome, and loaded up. We got our, put our parachutes and all that, issued parachutes to us. We had, prior to this, we had a lot of sandboxes, the terrain. We knew we were going to go in, and a lot of training, maps and so forth of the area that we're going to jump into France. And when we got to this airport, they even had more of that type thing where each company was going to land and so forth. Issued us food and ammunition and parachutes and so forth, and got on C-47s and flew out across either Sardinia or Corsica. I remember you could look down and see one of those islands into southern France. And on the afternoon of August 15th, we parachuted a daylight combat jump, which was very unusual, and parachuted into an area called Valborges. We're very close to La Motte, small town of La Motte. And our initial objective was to clear the drop zone of enemy and get it cleared out so the gliders could come in. And
come back to that. Dick, one question I want to ask you is, from the time that you went into basic training to the time you got out of airborne school, how did Dick change? And as well, the guys that were standing next to you, what was it that made them graduate or complete airborne school internally? Why were they able to accomplish what they accomplished?
As opposed to the guys that did not.
Yeah.
Right. Well, as far as the change in me, as I mentioned before, I had worked in some construction jobs. So I was away from home, living on my own with a buddy of mine, but So I was somewhat accustomed to not coming home to a home-cooked meal, you know, by working up in Messina, New York, and then in Patuxent Naval Base in Maryland. So I was somewhat accustomed to being on my own, doing shopping for myself and things like that. So going into the Army, it was the one big transition, of course, is you're in a barracks with just a big room with bunks all the way down, and showering with 5 other guys, and going to a bathroom where the toilets are just lined up side by side. Those are things that take a little getting used to. As far as changing from a juvenile into an adult, that transition probably started pretty much with basic training, because you were subjected to people over you, and you had to obey without question what they wanted you to do, and that's true also when I went into airborne. To a greater degree, because they would tell you the things to do that they knew you were going to dislike and might possibly rebel against. And of course, if you rebelled, you were out, you were gone. You had to do what they said without question. No complaining, not with their earshot of them anyway. You could bitch in the barracks later on, but so. As I say, the transition from a juvenile into an adult really began with basic training, and even graduated more when I when I got into airborne training. There were guys that dropped out of airborne that couldn't hack it, that they could not handle. You had guys, young men that maybe in their youth had done exactly what they wanted to do without answering to anybody, and that didn't work. You know, in the service, in the airborne, that didn't work. So many of those guys dropped out. They couldn't hack it. A lot of people dropped out of airborne for physical reasons. They just could not physically handle doing 25 push-ups or climbing a 1-inch rope, 15, 20 feet in the air. Get halfway up and couldn't hack it, and those people dropped out. Or were bounced out actually. An unusual circumstance when we were going through jump school. The classes, they had officers going through the same class that we did, and there was and these instructors, they were jump masters, instructors, they ruled, they were the law. Most of those were staff or tech sergeants, muscular, big, physical men, and we had captains, lieutenants, majors side by side, and you got some staff sergeants say, "Major, give me 20," and the major say, "You can't talk to me that way, Sergeant." And sergeants, "Well, if you don't like it, there's the office. Go quit." That was just one of the things that was unusual. I remember there was this one thing where they taught us how to tumble. And it was a pit kind of sawdust, and this is again in August in Georgia, and you're sweating and everything. And this major, he tumbled and got some sawdust in his mouth, and he kind of like that to spit it out, and this instructor got all over his case, and he had a harness on, no parachute, just a harness, and they made him jog around the area holding this harness up in the air. Now this is a major saying, "I will not spit in the sawdust anymore. I will not spit in the sawdust," and he's trotting around. I mean, this is degrading. But that's an indication of what I was saying, but they did everything they could to make you quit. And that was, and becoming an adult, really, the full cycle of that is when you went into combat. About the first time you get shot at, you grow up in a hurry, But it was kind of a gradual thing, but, as I say, I had the advantage of being raised in the country, so sleeping in the woods and camping out and that kind of stuff I was used to that. That didn't bother me at all.
As far as when Dick graduated airborne school, though, was he standing tall, and was he?
Oh, I was very, very proud. And they harped on that. These instructors, they said, "You're airborne. You're better than anybody else." They beat that into you. So, and you sincerely believed it. You sincerely believed that you were better than any infantryman in the Army. When you got those wings pinned on you, it was a very, very proud moment.
Awesome. Why do you think, first of all, they wanted only volunteers?
I really, that's a good question. I don't know. There would be a hue and cry if they were to take, get down the line and say, you and you and you're going to jump out of airplanes whether you want to or not. I would imagine politics would get involved in there, with mothers writing to their congressmen and so forth, and it worked. I mean, the volunteer program worked fine. They had an ample supply of young men who were willing to do this. There's, as far as I know, there's no shortage of volunteers for it.
Tell me, why do you think they paid you an extra $50 a month?
Because it was worth it. That was probably something to entice you more to volunteer. I'm sure it affected my decision, and I'm sure it affected a lot of guys. They decided to do it for that reason alone. And looking back on it, was really, unless you sent the money home, it was stupid, because you really didn't have anything to spend money on. You go to Charlotte and blow it on beer or something, or getting crap games and card games in the barracks. That's what you did with the money. That extra $50, it wasn't a benefit to anybody really, but it felt good anyway. So.
Yeah. I'm working with the youth in Australia, Dick, and okay, now we're going back to southern France, okay, but I want to talk. This is particularly for the program I'm working with. The name of the program, I didn't name them this, but they're called Young Pathfinders. And so, could you tell me, in a summary of how you viewed the Pathfinder and their role, and what made them special?
Well, Pathfinders, first of all, what a Pathfinder does, when you're going to make a combat jump, the Pathfinders go in generally the day before and set up beacons and so forth to guide the planes in so they land in the correct area. They go in, it's like a forward reconnaissance group. And now, as opposed to a mass parachute jump, you've got 2 or 3 or 5 men going in as Pathfinders, jumping 20 miles behind enemy lines. That took a lot of balls, a lot of guts. I'm sorry, so they were a special group, to people that did that, and the success of the jump depended a great deal on them. For night jumps, they went in, they set flares up and so forth. Day jumps, they had radio beacons that the U.S. Army Air Force, at that time was Army Air Force, they had something to guide in to make sure that they hit the right drop zone. Pathfinders were a step above the normal grunt,
Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so you left off. You dropped into southern France. You said La Motte, and then where we stopped was you said you were securing the area. Were you guys surrounded?
Well, there were German troops in the area. I think the reconnaissance. They obviously tried to jump into an area that wasn't too heavily defended to hold the casualties down. Anytime you jump behind the beaches, you're surrounded. Maybe not within 20 feet or so, but there's troops. The enemy is all the way around you. And as I mentioned, we had to clear that area of enemies so that the gliders could come in, because they were totally defenseless. And fortunately, as I say, there weren't too many. That particular area where we landed wasn't too heavily defended. We were fortunate that there weren't that many German troops around there. There were some, but not all. And I imagine that was done, that they chose that area. That was one of the reasons they chose that particular area. It's Valborges. It's a Stevens estate. Stevens family. The old manor house was built sometime in the 1300s, and way back, the Stevens family married into the French people that owned this. That's where the Stevens is not a French name. And the estate is it's a working farm. It's about 2,000 acres. Joe Kilgore, my old squad leader, and I went back there in 1996 and found the field where we landed and so forth. And Mr. Stevens' daughter was there and gave us a tour through the place and so forth. And this is near the town of La Motte, and once we got that area cleared out, one thing that was, looking back, that I remember is once we got the area cleared of Germans pretty much, the women started to come out of the woodwork, and they were running out and grabbing parachutes for the material, because they'd been under German rule for, 4 or 5 years or whatever, and they had no material, and they were taking nylon, there's camouflage nylon, and making underclothes and dresses and stuff. There's a little museum in Limoux that they've got a mannequin with a dress made out of parachute nylon it got lace and so forth on it. Then we did that, measured that, and we kind of stayed in that area that night, and the next day we attacked the city of Draguignan, and that was the first major city in southern France that was liberated. There's a national cemetery there in Draguignan, and some of our men are buried there. There's also, we have a street named after us, a 551st Avenida or something, I forget what. And there's also a monument there dedicated to the 551st Parachute Infantry, because we liberated that. In the process, we captured a German general. At that time, he was the highest ranking officer that had been captured during the war. From there, we moved.
What did you see any action there? What was your involvement in
well, I was a scout in each squad had a scout. The squad was made up of a radio man, generally, a machine gun, a mortar. They had different duties that they had to perform, and I was a scout, and in each squad had a scout. So we were generally out in front of the squad, kind of reconnoitering and trying to make contact with the enemy. And there was a lot of action. Draguignan was quite heavily defended, and there was a lot of action there, yeah. So we liberated that city, and then we moved southeast, down toward Antibes, Fréjus, and Caen. And outside of Caen, one night we took some very, very heavy shelling. It was a terrible night. It's a helpless feeling, because you can't even shoot back. I mean, the artillery is coming in. There's nothing really that you can shoot at to try to defend yourself. It was a fairly open area. We had a little dry stream bed that we tried to take cover in, and we lost quite a number of men that evening. And a tough thing that we had to do was the next morning, being a small battalion, you were generally short on a lot of things, and getting rations and trucks and jeeps and so forth. They were mostly allocated to bigger divisions. And they didn't have a grave detail, and we had to go down back into that area and carry our dead out on the shelter halves. Talked to one fellow that asked me about body bags. We didn't have body bags then. We had to take shelter halves and carry our dead out of that place. Terrible. I'm somewhat hard of hearing, and I can attribute, I think, a lot of that to that night. And never forget that night. It was a terrible, terrible night. Prior to that, there was a little bit of artillery and mortar fire that we'd been subjected to, but most of the stuff we were doing was small arms fire, machine guns and rifles and so forth. That was our first real, when we were subjected to artillery fire. And bad night. And from there we went on down.
How long did the artillery last?
God, it seemed like hours and hours. And I think, they probably on record somewhere, I don't know where, but perhaps in Greg Orfal's book. I think it seemed to me it was probably about an hour, maybe hour and a half, something like that. I forget. I really don't know. Just a terrible night. And then the next day we went.
Last time I was here, you made a comment that I was particularly I was impressed with. You said there weren't many atheists.
Well, that was we had an officer, yeah. Midway through this artillery barrage, and they were shooting railroad guns. I mean, huge things. They would actually, when that thing hit the ground and exploded, it would actually lift you off the ground. It was that big. And this one officer, Lieutenant Heck, in a little bit of a lull, made the observation. He said, "I wonder how many atheists there are here tonight." And never forgot him saying that. It was under the circumstances of what was going on, it was a pretty profound thing, for him to say. And start saying, next day we went on down to the coast, and we liberated Caen. And I mentioned a small town Antibes all along the French Riviera.
Well, let's go into that a little bit. Tell me about liberating a town.
Well, the 1st Airborne Task Force consisted of a lot of different units, 519 to 517. There was a British brigade, and there were a lot of different units. And we weren't solely responsible for liberating Caen. We were very much involved in it. And great jubilation. The people just, can't do enough for you. They're screaming and yelling. However, with Nice, we were the sole unit. The 551st liberated Nice. And I vividly remember that. I mean, just the people were, just screaming and yelling and hugging and bringing flowers and wine and stuff. And we were infantry, we're on foot, you couldn't carry all this stuff. But the women, hugging and kissing and shaking hands, and the men, and tears flowing down, it was just, it's a hard thing to realize. But again, they had been under German rule for years, and to finally be liberated of that situation, it had to be, I can't imagine what it was like for them, just in food and so forth. We were able to share with them cigarettes and candy and things like that. The kids, they're just, and that's why when you go back over there today, those people, the difference between here and over there, most people here, you know, D-Day comes and goes. Most people don't even think anything about it. Pearl Harbor Day is just another kind of a day. But over there, that's drilled into those people. And when my squad leader and I went over there in 1996, we had 10, 12-year-old kids come up and thank us profusely. You know, thank you so much for what you did. You know, it's totally different. And we have never had a foreign force invade us on our land, you know, and those people, how many times they've been through World War I or World War II, and so it's drilled in them in school. And of course the older people remember. A lot of the older people that were kids at the time are grown people now, and they remember, and they're very, very grateful.
And once again, I bet it was a time you were proud to be an airborne.
Oh, very much so. Parachutiste, you know. And when my buddy and I went back over there in 1996, and the people knew, you know, they found out what we were, as opposed to people coming into the beach had it tough too, you know. But for some reason, the airborne, they just doted on us, you know. They doted on us, and. After we moved on out of Caen, the 550 stayed down on the beach, and a lot of the other troops went inland further. We arrived at the Var River, comes down out of the Alps between Caen and Nice, and the Germans had blown the bridge, the main highway along the coast, and we had to crawl across that thing on the girders and stuff. I remember with a devil of a time getting across that thing. And then, as I say, went on into Nice. And I think we were in Nice a few days, and that was, you know, it was great. I mean, they put us, they billeted us in hotels and stuff. And as again, the people were just, you couldn't, they couldn't thank you enough, you know. And then we went from there. They trucked us up in, and we established a line in the Maritime Alps. We were stationed in St. Martin Vesubie and Saint Etienne, and there were various little towns that we were billeted in, and did a lot of patrol work out of there. But that was kind of nice duty, because again, we were in these were like Saint Martin Vesubie is a resort town. Now it's a big ski area. At that time, it was a summer thing. People used to go there for hiking and so forth. It's up in the Alps, and so there were a number of hotels and so forth. We were billeted in hotels. We had outposts up on top of the mountains in various places. And we'd go up and maybe spend 3 or 4 days in outposts, and then they would relieve us. Another group of people would come up, and in addition to that, did a lot of patrol work. We were right on the Italian border at this point, and a lot of our patrols, we actually went into northern Italy. And the Germans had back up in these, I don't know how they did it, but they had pillboxes up in these valleys and stuff, you know. A lot of patrol work. We'd meet them, they'd meet us, and there would be shots fired and prisoners taken and stuff like that. But by and large, that was it was combat duty, but it was nice in the fact that we, not every night, but very often, we had a bed to sleep in as opposed to sleeping on the ground and so forth. An interesting thing on these outposts that we had up on the mountains, they were little stone shacks. The farmers in the summertime used to take their sheep and cattle up to graze on top of these mountains, and they had little huts that they stayed in. They would be up there all summer long, and we used these huts as outposts. And there was no water or anything like that up there, no food, and we packed a lot of this stuff up. We had backpacks, we packed a lot of that stuff in, but we were supplied by mules, or donkeys actually, not mules, little burros that the French people had, and they would bring jerry cans of water and rations and so forth up to these outposts. At the time, there was a guy named Paul Parent. He was a French Canadian, spoke French, and he was in charge. I think he was a corporal or something. He was in charge of organizing these donkey little Frenchmen, with little berets on, and he was funny. He'd have these guys with their mules all loaded up and standing in the town square there in St. Martin, and he's yelling at them in French, and these guys are standing there, and then they would take off to the various outposts, and
they were doing their military.
Yeah, I've got some photographs of these guys with their donkeys and stuff, Then we were there. Got some snow. We were there until started to snow. We got there, it was in like November, I guess probably mid-November, or even a little later, maybe toward the end of November, when we were relieved by I think it was the 442nd of the Nisei, the Japanese troops from Hawaii, had been in northern Italy, and they relieved us there, and we went up north. It was supposed to be kind of a R&R thing, actually, and we went up to Lyon, France, and there was a military school or something. We were billeted in, and we were getting ready. We were going to have a Christmas party. I played a guitar. A fellow named Bill Hatcher was in my squad. Had a clarinet that he bought in Nice or somewhere, or Cannes, and we were kind of organizing this Christmas party when Hitler decided that he would have his last big offense, and the Battle of the Bulge started, and we were thrown right into the middle of that. Most of the time we were attached to the 82nd Airborne Division. The disadvantage we had, we still had summer uniforms from southern France. Well, I remember, the patrol work, I don't want to say it was boring. The scenery was gorgeous. I mean, if you can visualize the Alps, I remember one patrol, we were trails, and we were going up into this valley, and we got fired on. There was a German patrol that had come in the other way and fired on, and the first guy they wounded was a medic. He had the big red cross on his hat, and he got wounded quite severely. And I think they wounded he and another guy that day, and we scattered. They were quite a distance away, and a couple of us circled around. We had to cut across and kind of try to flank them, but by the time we got up there, they had split. They knew what we were doing. So it was kind of a hit and run thing on their part.
Were you involved with I remember my father telling a story about a patrol that was going along the riverbank, along a road in a river, and they were fired upon from a pillbox.
That's up in these valleys.
And then that night, they were pinned down in the riverbank, and then that night they kind of toppled. Were you involved with that at all?
Yeah, I know exactly what he's talking about. And we got up in that night. We got out of there, and there were a few different squads involved in that thing, of companies, I believe. And we got out of there and went up on the side of a hill and found a cave. We got back into a cave and stayed there that night. And the next day, we could look across the valley and see this pillbox. And again, there was all we could do is kind of, at that point, you couldn't go attack that thing, So we just kind of reconnoitered, and so we could report back in as to what was there, how many troops and so forth, how heavily fortified it was, and just returns in. But I know exactly what I was talking about.
Okay, so you weren't part of taking that pillbox?
No, we did not. At least my outfit did not take the pillbox.
Okay. We
We did not attack the pillbox. We were too lightly, and it was clear way across the valley. I mean, we had to watch it with binoculars. I mean, it was quite a ways away. But they had heavy weapons they could fire. They had like 50 caliber machine guns.
Because the story he told me was they had walked along there was a road along the river, and they had passed empty pillboxes along the way. and as they passed this one, they assumed it was empty, and they were fired upon. They were pinned down in the riverbank. And so that night they climbed up to a higher point above the pillbox and waited all night long until next morning, until the Germans came out of their pillbox. And one of the bazooka, he said, bazooka men hit perfect shot. They came out to do their calisthenics, and the bazooka man hit a perfect shot right above the pillbox that collapsed the entrance. There was only one entrance into the series of pillboxes, and they couldn't get back in.
Ducks on the pond.
Yeah. A funny story they told as well was, not funny, but one German went off to take a crap. And they swear everyone shot at the guy taking the crap.
That's neat. That's neat. Yeah, well, they were, as I mentioned, they had pillboxes. I think most of these pillboxes were built up in that area because they were concerned more with the troops coming up. General Clark was coming up through Italy and get up, I guess, as far as Milan, and they were concerned about him coming on up. And I think most of those pillboxes were built for the defense of northern Italy, and we were coming in from the flank, actually. By this time, of course, the Normandy troops had gone pretty much all the way across France, and the war was turning, so. But those things were manned. I saw a good many pillboxes up in there.
Okay, so you were in Lyon, France.
And starting to get a Christmas party together, and next thing I know, we're on 6x6 trucks, and they're tracking us up. And that was total confusion, because when they broke through, there were pockets of, that's how Bastogne, they got involved, they got surrounded, and they dropped us off. And as I mentioned, we were, at that time, we were still the 551st Battalion, but we were attached to the 82nd Airborne Division. And there we did a lot of crap work for them. Raids, Neuffontaine was one raid in particular where they wanted us to go in and just get 3 or 4 prisoners and get out. We wound up, I think we took like 15 prisoners, and a lot of inflicted a lot of casualties. To them, the raid was much more successful than they had planned it to be. Now, a funny thing on that particular raid, so now it's cold weather.
Tell me about the weather. Yeah.
Well, look, it was bitter cold. The weather generally ranged from 10 or 20 above down to 0, and snow on the ground. And again, we had lightweight uniforms, and at this time we were trying to bum sweaters and stuff from some of the tank guys. They had much warmer clothes than we did. And on this Neuffontaine, we were going along this road. There had been a lot of vehicular traffic, and the snow was packed. That was almost like ice. I mean, you could have actually skated on it. It was that hard, And we were on the left side of this road advancing, and the machine gun opened up on us, and there was a ditch, so everybody went down in this ditch. This is B Company I'm talking about now. And this machine gun had us pinned down, and we tried to inch forward to get up close enough where we could maybe get some hand grenades up in there. A fellow named Charlie Brubaker thought it'd be a good idea if he could get across the road into the ditch on the other side and maybe go up, crawl up the ditch and flank this machine gun. So he got permission from, I guess his platoon leader probably. And he jumps out of the ditch to run across the road, and it was ice. And he slipped and fell flat on his face right out in the middle of this road. Now the machine gun is blasting away, and you could see the bullets where they're hitting, they're chipping the ice up, and we figured Charlie's done, there's no way in the world he could survive this, because they blasted away. And finally, he just laid perfectly still, and finally it let up, and we heard him, "I'm coming back." and he jumps, and I remember I grabbed his arm and jerked him into the thing. Never got touched. He did not get wounded that night. And
tell me, when you were trucked to the front, let's say, from Leon to the, what was that? Tell me a bit more detail about.
Well,
that.
As I remember, it's stuff all kinds of run together. As I remember, it was at night and cold as hell, and we're sitting in the back of this truck, and it seems, it wasn't I forget how long we were on the truck, but it was a fairly long period of time, like I'd say an hour maybe or so, driving up to where the fighting was, and then and dropped off, and it was a lot of confusion because again they were breaking through, and it's just kind of a blur really. I don't remember. I remember the cold, and we did have enough ammunition and stuff to spread out, and then we started making patrols and feeling out where the enemy actually was, and then the orders started to come down from the 82nd Airborne Division as what we were supposed to do.
Did you see any retreating troops?
Any what?
Did you see any American retreating troops, infantry?
Oh yeah. They were falling. They call it falling back, but. Yeah, sure. They dropped back into our lines because at that time, the Germans they were coming on strong. They were that thing was working. That offensive lunge that they put through there was working, and when we started to pour troops in there, we made a slow down and stop. But, oh yeah, there were troops dropping back, and a lot of wounded. We saw a lot of wounded, and. Then on, as I mentioned, Neuffontaine, Trois Points, and there were the little towns that we attacked, or hit raids on and drew back, fell back, and then the thing that you have to remember, the Battle of the Bulge was a relatively short period of time. It only lasted about a month, 3 weeks to a month or so was about all it lasted. And then on the latter part of December, we started attacking these series of small towns. And the last town that we were attacking that really broke our back was the town of Rochelaval. And we had taken casualties throughout the last few days before Rochelaval. And Rochelaval is a little farm community. It sat on a hill with area cleared all around it where the farmers used to farm and graze their cattle and so forth. And back in the woods you had cover, but to get to the town you had to cross this open field. There's no way around it. And we had no artillery cover, no armor. And we had to go out across that open field, and tremendous amount of small arms fire, casualties or bodies laying all over the place, tremendous amount of casualties. And got closer, the 5th and 6th, and the final push was on the 7th of January of 1945. And this is my end of the thing, that what happened to me, actually. I was in a little depression. That fellow Marshall Clay was a Navajo Indian that he went through jump school with me, and we'd become quite friendly. And he was on a little elevated area, and a mortar shell came down. It hit closer to him and wounded him very severely on the left side of his face, tore his face all up, and he was blinded. He had from shrapnel and dirt and stuff that had flown into his eyes. And the real danger is not only bleeding to death, but freezing to death if you didn't get care pretty rapidly. And I remember, and I don't know who the non-com was to this day, I don't remember, but I told him, I said, I got to get Clay back to the aid station. It was an aid station, little stone building about a half mile back. And I got a hold of him, and we had to, because it's this open field, it was all, again, bodies all over the place and tremendous amount of small arms fire. And so we had to crawl and drag him and got back into the cover of woods, and then we were able to get up and stumble along to get to this building. And opened the door to get him in, and there was a potbelly stove there, and they took him, and it was a 2-room affair. They took him into another room, and I saw that stove, and I had not felt heat at that point. It had been about 4 days that I had not felt heat of any kind at all, not even a little bonfire or anything. And I figured there was an opportunity to take my boots off, my socks, and try to get my socks dry and maybe get some heat on my feet. And I took my boots off and laid my socks on top and put them up against the stove, and I was sitting there. My socks were like frozen stiff when I took them off, and the ends of my toes were starting to turn black. And the doctor came out of this other room, and he walked over to me. He said, "Let me look at your feet." And he says, "You're out of here." And they evacuated me back to Liège.
What was wrong with your feet?
They had a severe frostbite. Frozen feet, whatever. I had no feeling at all. I had no feeling in my feet at all. They were completely numb. And vacuumed me back to Liège. I was in Liège maybe a day or two at the most. This is all kind of a blur. And then by ambulance across France, and then across the English Channel. And I wound up...
Just one question, Dick. Before you exit the Bulge, tell me more about the infantry soldier and the conditions he had to endure, generally.
Well, the big thing, again, being a small battalion as we were, lack of food. We had C rations and K rations. C rations are cans, beef stew, franks and beans, and we'd eat that stuff cold when you could get it. We didn't have that much of it because there were no fires to heat the stuff up. K rations are a little box about the size of a Cracker Jack box, and they had a can of cheese in there and some crackers, olive drab toilet paper, chocolate bar and stuff like that. But there was a big lack of food. Sometimes we'd have maybe a can of C rations all day long. That's all we had. Bitter, bitter cold. And that affects your efficiency. You can't, when you're that cold, you can't operate as you normally would. You try to move around as much as you can. As far as sleeping goes, you couldn't. The ground was frozen. It was very difficult to try to dig anything like a foxhole or whatever. You slept very often, just lean up against a tree and got as much rest that way as you could. And that went on for, like I say, about 4 days, in one period of time. One humorous incident I remember, somewhere in there we had a mail call. They got some mail up to us somehow. I forget how that happened, whatever. And this one guy got a package from home, and he opens it up, and this little, you've seen little, Knott's Berry Farm has some little jars of jelly. They were little small jars. I think there were like 5 or 6 of them. And it was, it said, "Orange marmalade, your heart's delight." And it's like 0. And this guy's got 5 little jars of orange marmalade. We got a chuckle out of that. That's one of the little things you don't, forget. But it was just, this is where the intense training that we had really came through. I've got I showed you the other night these daily reports, company reports, where it had weather, cold and snow, morale, excellent. There was no complaining, no bitching. Everybody was in the same boat, and you just it was a tremendous hardship, and you accepted it and did your duties. That's about what it boils down to.
What were the nights like? And
Oh God, so cold. Another funny incident. We were moving at night, and finally they decided to let us stop and try to get some rest. So we went in this grove of trees and just flopped down, you know. Woke up the next morning to German bodies all around. There'd been a pitched battle there the day before, and there must have been 8 or 10 dead Germans laying there. When we moved in there at night, we didn't see them. We flopped down, and we wake up the next morning, there's all these dead bodies laying around. But you know, you get so callous that you really didn't, you know, it didn't, big deal. So the dead Germans, you know, you really didn't, it didn't bother us that much, really.
during the Bulge, did you experience any hand-to-hand combat?
No. I never got. There were, I think, A Company got involved in some, but the best of my knowledge, B Company never. We were close. I mean, you were very, very close. I'm talking a matter of a few yards, very often from the enemy. But I never did get involved with hand-to-hand combat.
How about artillery? Did you experience any of the artillery in the Bulge?
No. Well, that was the problem we had. We had no. The only
German 88s, right?
Well, there was some of that. There was not because it was so heavily wooded. There's not that much tank action around there. Now, when the initial breakthrough came, there was a tremendously heavy artillery barrage from the east to soften things up a little bit, and but the only artillery we got when we were attacking these towns, the Germans were entrenched and they had artillery and mortars and stuff. But as far as our end of it goes, we didn't have any. We had no armor, no tanks, and no artillery backing us up at all. The Germans did have, yeah.
Were you involved with the action on January 3rd and taking that?
Well, I was
going through the open field.
Yeah, well, I was in all of that stuff. Yeah. I was right in the middle of all of that stuff. Well, you went over there and visited. You saw this open field that we had across. Of course, you were there in the summertime, a little different circuit. Oddly enough, there was a guy came. I forget who it was now, but he had gone out into that open area and walked around. He was picking up shell casings, sea ration cans and stuff that was laying out there in that field, you know. This was sometime in the 90s, and he brought a bunch of stuff to a reunion that he had just gone around and picked up in that field. The Grand held an 8-shot clip, and when the last shot was fired, that clip would fly out of the top of the rifle, and then you'd jam another one back down in there, and it would make a ping, bing, when that thing flew out. And he had some of those that he picked up. So that stuff is still laying out there, I suppose. I know we wanted to go out there and look around for it.
What to you, Dick, you know, from airborne school, let's say, to the time you got out, what would have been the scariest moment for you, where you feared the most?
I would say probably the night we were getting shelled outside of Caen. Totally helpless feeling. There was no cover. As I said, a little dry stream bed that we're in. You couldn't even shoot back at what was being shot at you. And that was probably the closest I got to say, my God, I'm going to die here tonight, you know. And a lot of guys did die there that night. But I didn't even get a scratch. I went all through, I've often wondered how that can be. I went all the way through all this mess and never never got wounded. I froze my feet, but I never got anything that drew blood. Whereas guys right next to me were killed, and Marshall Clay, I mentioned, he was 6 feet from me when this happened, 8 feet from me when that happened to him. And you wonder how come that would happen, that I'm here and he's there, he gets killed and I don't, time and time again, No answer for that, I guess. I don't know.
How did you deal with that?
Well, at the time, you think why him and why him and not me. You didn't really think that much about it then, but after the war, I've thought about that often. A certain thing would hit, and this one guy, this night we got shelled. There was one fellow, can't even remember his name. We were laying in the stream bed, and he was laying belly down from here to that door from me. The whole top of his head blown off. I mean, when we were he pulled him out the next morning, and the gray matter. It was just, and it's that close, and so you think, well, God, I was just lucky, And I guess that's what the devil it is. I don't know. There's no reason that I can come up with why I should be spared and somebody else got killed or somebody else got wounded and I didn't, I don't know.
Well, from the time you went into service to the time you got out, did your relationship with God or change at all? Or?
Well, I've never been a real religious person. I believe in God, and you feel a lot closer to him under circumstances like that. Like I mentioned, this Lieutenant Heck that said, "I wonder how many atheists there are." There are times that when it got hairy, where you prayed, yeah, darn right you did, and I don't know if it made me a more religious person or not, and I can't say that my belief in God spared me and not this guy, because he might have believed in God just as much as I did, or maybe more so. So, to me, there's really no answer on that. I don't know why I was spared because I was a better person than him. I don't think so. I don't know what the answer to that is.
So, but since you've been spared, Dick Fields had accomplished a fair bit in his life. Why don't you go on from there?
Well, you want me to?
Well, you survived this, and
well, went back. I was back in the hospital for about 2 months. Went back up and at that time I became a member of the 505 Regiment of the 82nd Airborne Division. And at this point, I didn't know that the 551st had been deactivated. And I was on a train station in France, and I spotted Tom Thornton, my first sergeant. And I walked down to him, and he was on his way back up to join the 82nd also. And I asked him about the 551st, and he said, "Field, there is no more 551st." And he told me then it had been deactivated. And fought on across Germany, across the Elbe River, met the Russians when we crossed the Elbe River, went on into Berlin.
Did you see a lot of action?
Well, by the time, the further we learned along, the war was really winding up. We were taking prisoners by the thousands, literally by the thousands. The war was really winding down, and so the intense combat it wasn't as much. There was some. There were small cities and so forth where they would hold up, and there were some snipers and things like that we had to clear out. But by and large, the combat the intense combat had slacked off quite a bit.
Tell me, were you involved at all, Dick, with any liberations of concentration camps?
No,
Prisoners
no,
or anything?
no. We were north of there. The concentration camps were in Poland and down in the south of where we were. We were across mid to north Germany is where we were. So I never saw any of that. We heard about it. That went through the ranks pretty much when they started finding those things. But I never was involved in any of that. No.
Okay, so let's say, for instance, we advanced to, let's say, the Berlin. You met up with the Russians.
We crossed the Elbe River.
Yeah.
And then we were there, I don't know, a few days or so, I don't really remember. And we went on in, and by this time it was just almost a matter of getting on trucks and just driving through. There was, as I say, we weren't, there was very little combat involved. A lot of prisoner taking. And got into Berlin, and we were, Berlin at that time was divided into 4 sectors: French, English, Russian, and American. The 82nd Airborne Division was the military presence for the American sector, the honor guard. We had to wear white gloves, and they used parachute shroud lines for bootlaces, and it was, it wasn't, after what I'd been through, it wasn't my cup of tea too much. Then we started getting a bunch of replacements, people that had been on the ocean on the way over as the war wound down, and rather than just turn them around, take them back, they sent them on in, and replacements as the veterans were going home. And some of these guys were just unbearable, try to throw the weight around. And I finally got fed up with it. I went to my company commander and kind of laid it on him. I said, I've been over here 2 years. I've been shot at, slept in the snow, froze my feet. And I said, I got some guy coming over here that's never been shot at in his life and treating me like I'm a piece of dirt. And I said, I'd like some kind of a transfer to something other than what I was doing, standing guard on a street corner with white gloves on. And he was sympathetic to my cause, and he put me in charge of recreation. I was going around and setting up volleyball nets and horseshoe pits and softball equipment and stuff like that. And I finally got a building. It had been an old barracks or something, and I opened a beer hall. I located a brewery in town. I was able to get beer. Got a piano. We got a piano, so we had a little nightclub thing. And the nice thing about that is I had a room on the end of this building. There was a separate room that I set my bunk up, and I didn't even have to stand reveille. I mean, I had it made, and I did that until I'd accumulated enough points. It was just a matter of waiting to get you back home, and came back home, and my father was an independent garageman, and he and I and my brother went in. He took us into business, and I learned my actual trade from him. Our son was born, and he was asthmatic, so we couldn't handle it. This was in New York City, so we went back up to the small town in upstate New York where I was born, and I went to work in an automobile agency up there as a working service manager, and it was a resort town, and you busted your tail in the summertime to make a living, and then in the winter you starved to death. Not starved to death, but the money wasn't there, and there was no chance for advancement to get ahead at all. So we moved. A fellow named Levitt was building huge housing developments out on Long Island, and he was building one down in Pennsylvania. Moved down to Pennsylvania and bought a house, and I worked at an automobile agency in Trenton, New Jersey, which was just across the river. Now, here's a funny little story. I'll tell you about Howard Adcock. I went to work as a line mechanic in the automobile agency, and the fellow right next to me, a man named Howard Adcock, and we ate our lunch together and went to company picnics and all this kind of stuff, and we're quite friendly, you know. And then I was advanced from that. They made me assistant service manager at the same agency. And then another automobile agency across the river in Pennsylvania hired me away as a service manager, and I lost track of Howard Adcock. I never saw him anymore. And here about 6 or 7 years ago, a little more than that, probably 10 years ago, got a book written by Dan Morgan, and it's pictorial, a bunch of old photographs, and I find a picture in there of Howard Adcock. He had been in the 551st, I think he was in A company, or headquarters company. I was in B company, so I did not know him. But we worked side by side for a couple of years, and never ever came up that he was a paratrooper that I was, or what unit he had been in. Blew my mind. I said, how did I work this long next to this guy, and this never came up. Tried to contact him, and I found his son. Howard had died, and I talked quite a while with his son, and the son remembered me. He used to come in to the shop occasionally with his mother, and he would come down to visit his dad, and his dad didn't. He remembered me. But that's just the point here, of course, is that when we came back, we just didn't talk about where we'd been or what we'd done or anything else. It was just a part of our life that was just forgotten about, put aside, you know. And that's the point I'm making with Howard Adcock. We worked side by side for a couple of years, you know, never ever realized that we'd been airborne paratroopers, worked in the same unit throughout the war, and never discussed it with each other. Funny thing. As I mentioned, went across the river, became a service manager in a dealership there. In 1958, I thought I'd like to try selling cars instead of being in the service end of it. I went on the floor, on the showroom floor, started selling cars. Did that, work my way up into management. My kids, meanwhile, had been married. This was after 20-some years, moved away, and I had a big house, a lot of work, and decided I didn't want to be there anymore, and decided to move to California.
Do you think what you went through as far as training, airborne training, basic training, and as well service, did it help you to? Did it give you the foundation?
Oh, I see. Yeah, very much so. The biggest thing I think I developed was confidence. It was a big move. I had a good job. I was a service manager in a very, very active Chrysler agency, high-powered job, and I decided that I wanted to chuck that and go on the floor selling cars, and. But I had enough confidence to think that I could do that, and it turned out I did. I mean, it worked out very, very fine for me. I wound up making more money, worked my way up into management again, you know, and it just it was the right thing to do. But if I wasn't confident, I would never have tried it, and I think that came from a lot of the training I had in the military. There's no question about that. You know.
Probably during your military career, and certainly probably during your you got past the Depression. Let's say you survived the Depression, you survived the war. Did that also in your life give you really a benchmark of how bad life could be, and then it gave you an opportunity really as you got older to reflect how good you had it now?
Yeah, I believe so. Being so dirt poor during the Depression, you kind of have to look at it as a form of training, actually. It made me, as I advanced myself in my career and got better at what I did, started getting more material things, it made me appreciate that much more. That's something that I think with youth today, you really can't. They can't accept that. You know that. I think it's a good thing to be knocked on your butt and get back up and make something of yourself. And if that hasn't happened to you, I think you're lacking in something really. There's no question that my upbringing as a kid during depression was a benefit to me throughout my life. You know, even today. You know, I look around at what I've got. I'm not wealthy by any means, but I'm comfortable. I drive a nice car, and sometimes I'll get in that thing, and my God, I said, you know, stuff that happened to me when I was a kid. Who would ever thought that I'd be sitting here in this car, driving this car? I'd have this home, you know. So there's things. The kids today are going to miss that.
What is, you know, you've gotten to really understand holistically now really what the Goyas went to, but what does it mean to you to be a Goya?
Well, as a poet, I think we talked a little bit about this. The Goyas was a battalion, which is a small unit. When you look at the overall picture of the thing, a battalion is a small unit, and because of that, we were more like family. It was a much closer knit group than, say, if I had been originally with the 505. I don't remember. I remember very few guys that I was in the 505, the 82nd Airborne Division. I don't even remember my company commander's name. I don't remember my platoon leader's name. And I remember all of that stuff from the 551st because we went through so much together, you know, as a small unit. And it makes me very proud. I'm really proud when I go to these reunions and meet these guys and talk to them and realize what we went through together. And I don't think you'll have that in a larger unit. Even the 509 was a regimental combat team. A regiment is 4 battalions, 4 times bigger than we were. And I attended one of the reunions over in Palm Springs, and it was massive. There were people all over the place. And I thought to myself, there's something lacking here. It just doesn't have the closeness, you know, that we have when we go to our reunions. And the funny thing is, Keith, when you look at your whole lifetime, I'll be 80 in August. We're talking about 3 years here, a very short period of time. Really, when you look at your whole life, and yet there are bonds and friendships that were made that are extremely strong to this day.
Tell me about the guy, didn't matter who he was, but the guy next to you. What, was there trust there? Was there?
Well, there had to be. There had to be. You had to totally depend on what he was going to do. He had to depend on what you were going to do. Then this is where the training comes in. Tremendous amount of trust. You had to back him up, or he was backing you up, and you had to know that he was there. And he had to know that you were there if he needed, you know. And that's something that, again, because of that's particularly true in your squad. You were closer to those people because you associated more with them, you know. And the trust that you had in each other. You knew damn well when the guy's setting a machine gun up, he was trying to protect the whole squad, or a mortarman, or whatever, you know. So there was a tremendous amount of trust with each other. There has to be to have a successful unit. There has to be trust.
Did you feel that the men next to you were willing to die?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Without giving it a second thought.
And were you willing to die?
Oh yes. Oh yes. And not even think about it. Yeah. And that's, I don't know, what you call it, dedicated. There is no name for that, really, I don't think. It's not dedicated, it's not trust, it's just, that's the way it is, you know, in combat and war.
Did you love those guys? Did you love those guys?
Very much. Very much. I'd never admit it then. Yeah, we did. Might not even have known it, actually.
What about the leaders within the Goliath? Even your squad leader.
Yeah, that was Joe Kilgore was my squad leader, and as a rule, non-coms, you know, corporals, sergeants on up, they didn't fraternize much with privates and PFCs. They hung out with other non-coms. But there was just some kind of a chemistry between he and I. We became very, very close. I'm in touch with him today. He lives in El Paso, Texas. We went back to France together. He and I just became very, very close, which is not, a lot of people claim that's a dangerous thing to do in wartime, you know. And I don't know what it is. It was just, as I say, a chemistry there that he watched out for me and I watched out for him. And then going on up from there, you get into your platoon sergeants, Joe Kosowski, he's now dead. Our platoon leader, Lieutenant Heck. Our company commander, Captain Evans. Our guys had high respect for him. They'd follow him through a brick wall. He knew what he was doing, and everybody knew that he knew what he was doing. So when he made a decision or came down with an order, you knew it was the right thing, you know. Good leadership. On up to battalion, Colonel Jorg, he was loved by his troops. Highly respected man.
Were you aware the day he was killed? Did you know he was
No, I was back in the hospital. Okay. I was evacuated that same day. I didn't know he was dead until got to talk to Tom Thornton 2 months later in the train station in France.
Did you know Jorg at all, or not?
Well, I saw him. I didn't. The people in headquarters company knew him much more than we would have, you know. I saw him all the time, but I don't know if he even knew my name, for that matter, you know.
What made a good leader?
Well, a certain charisma that has to be there. Confidence. You can feel. You can do this today. I know you can. When you talk to somebody, you can tell whether they're confident or not. That in the work that I did in civilian life. And hiring people, you can tell, and I think that's probably the biggest thing that makes a leader. The people under him know that he's confident in what he can do, and they're confident that they know that he can do that. You know, I would say probably that's the biggest thing that makes a good leader.
And they had all that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Everyone I ever had contact with did. And I think this reverts back all the way back to airborne. When people have volunteered for airborne, and if they made it through jump school, they were different than a lot of other people. So I think you just had a higher class of individual. You know, I don't mean elite or anything by that. I'm not talking caste here. You know what I mean? But I think they were just a better group of people. You know, they accepted training better. They had confidence, back to confidence again, and I think that went all the way through, right up to the officers to the battalion headquarters.
What would you like to say? What would you like to say to the next generation? What would you like to say to the youth?
Well, that's a tough question. One thing that I would, and I've given a few talks at schools and so forth, and one thing that I generally, when I'm done talking, that I try to bring up is the fact, again, I repeat this, we were kids, we were young kids, and now we're old men. And to tell a kid when you're in a supermarket and there's a guy tottering along with a cart, and maybe you're impatient, you can't get around him, or maybe he's out in the parking lot and he's having trouble getting his car parked. Be a little patient, because that guy might have been a bomber pilot or a paratrooper. So instead of being impatient, offer to help him, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Are you disappointed with the youth of today?
I don't think so. I think because there's so much media coverage, everything is so immediate, that you tend to hear about the bad kids and very little about the good kids. But for every bad kid out there, there's probably 50 or 100 good kids, you know, that you don't hear about.
Dick, you've got confidence in the youth of today. I
think so. I think if the circumstances were the same, that they would rise to the challenge. I really do. You hear so much about gangs and gang shootings and kids going ape in school and shooting kids, but by and large, the youth, they're much more educated than we were. They're much more accessible to them with TV and computers and stuff than we ever did. And I think that's all to their benefit. I think we'll be fine with the kids we have today. Getting back to leadership, it has to start at home. It has to start in school, and you know, that's where the basis of everything that they're going to be in later life. That's where it has to start.
Awesome. Power of the team, power of your platoon, power of your men next to you. Tell me a little bit how that maybe made you a better guy, or a more effective person.
I think probably we touched on this before. The trust that you had in your fellow troopers. You learn to get along with people better and accept people for what they are. You know, you can't change people, and I realized that helped me a great deal in management, where I had 15 or 20 salespeople, and you had to handle every one of them differently because they're all different personalities. And the same thing in our platoon. Joe Ciccinelli is no more like me than the man in the moon. So I think the one thing you learned in order to succeed, to be a successful unit, you had to learn to get along with each other, as well as trust each other. And I think that carries on into your future life, you know.
There was something there that... Okay, considering life, you know, to me, and I'd like you to somewhat reiterate it if you agree or disagree what the question is, but in life, do you agree it's better to be more offensive or defensive? Like a paratrooper, he was more of an offensive troop or a defensive troop. So in life, are you better off being offensive or defensive?
I think that depends on the circumstance. You have to have the ability to be both, I think. There are times you have to be aggressive, and there are times when you have to back off, and not necessarily be defensive, but be less aggressive, I would say. And that depends on any particular circumstance at any given time. I don't think you can generalize and say, I'm going to be, my life, I'm going to be aggressive. I'm going to be, you can't do that. You know, you have to be able to handle both. Again, and then that comes to whether it's your job or dealing with people or whatever. You know, you have to be able to adapt, and you have to be able to be able to sense when to be aggressive, as opposed to when to back off.
Okay. I use the term offensive rather than aggressive. Was the paratrooper an offensive type soldier?
Oh yeah. Yeah, attack, attack, attack. Our motto, land and attack. If we had, it kind of, sometimes on some of these raids that we went on, where we would go in and attack a barracks or whatever to take prisoners, and then we had to pull back. And sometimes it was galling to be able to have to pull back out of there. You wanted to keep, when things were going, you wanted to keep going. You know very much, and I think that's probably true with all infantrymen, not just paratroopers. I think it's probably particularly true with airborne. Just the fact that you're jumping behind enemy lines, you know. You're coming down from the sky. You better be offensive.
Awesome. Okay, Mike, that's fantastic. That's good.